She had been walking since before the sun crested the ridge, and now the sun was directly overhead and merciless. Nora Begley kept her eyes fixed on the shimmer of heat rising off the cracked earth and told herself that shimmer was not water, had never been water, and that she would not weep over it. The small blanket bundle pressed against her chest shifted and whimpered, and she tightened her arms around it and kept walking. The dry flats had no name for kindness. She had crossed them once before, riding in a wagon beside her husband, and the crossing had taken half a day with 2 good horses and a barrel sloshing full. That was before Thomas died of the fever and left her with nothing but debts and a daughter 4 months old, and the understanding that no one in Callaway Creek was going to let a woman with a baby work a feed store account she couldn't pay. She had walked out of Callaway Creek with what she could carry on her back and 6 inches of water in a dented canteen. That canteen was empty now, had been empty since before dawn. She wetted her fingertip from the last trace of moisture at the rim and pressed it to the baby's lips. Clara made a small, dissatisfied sound and turned her head, and Nora nearly broke right there in the middle of nothing. She pressed on instead, 1 foot, then the other. The packed clay was pale as bone, and cracked in patterns like something ancient had tried to write a warning there and given up. She thought about Granville. Her sister lived in Granville, 20 miles past the far edge of the flats. She thought about water in a tin cup and the way her sister would open the door without asking questions. She thought about Clara growing up in a real house with a garden and a well that worked. These thoughts were the only things that had weight, and she held them the way she held Clara, close, without loosening, no matter how her arms burned. Her vision swam. She stopped, pressed her free hand to her knee, and breathed until the black at the edges of her sight pulled back. The sun hit the cracked ground and bounced back upward, and she was surrounded by it on all sides. She lifted her head and scanned the horizon out of habit, not hope. Then she saw the dust. It rose in a slow thin column 3 miles to the northwest, the kind of dust a single horse makes when it moves at a purposeful walk. Nora watched it for a long moment. It changed direction. It was coming toward her. She didn't know whether to run or stand still. Running was beyond her. She stood still. Mercer Wilde had been riding fence line since early morning, which meant he had been riding fence line alone, which was how he spent most of his days and had spent most of his days for going on 6 years. The Wilde Ranch ran 3,000 acres of high range and dry flats margin, and he ran it with 2 hired hands who had the good sense not to talk too much. That suited him. He had come back from the war with a ringing in one ear that never quit and a preference for the particular silence of open country, and he had built the kind of life that required nothing of anyone. He was not a man who looked for trouble. He was also not a man who could ride past it. He had spotted the shape from the crest of the eastern ridge, a dark upright thing against all that pale emptiness, moving too slowly and too steadily to be anything but person in serious difficulty. He turned his horse, a grey quarter horse named Duster, and let him pick his own pace down the slope. By the time he was half a mile out he could see it was a woman. By the time he was a quarter mile out he could see she was carrying something, and that she was not going to last much longer. He pulled up 10 feet away and dismounted without announcing himself loudly, because a woman alone on the flats had every right to be frightened, and he had no intention of frightening her more than she already was. "Ma'am," he said, that was all. She looked at him with eyes that had gone past fear into something that was mostly just exhaustion. She was young, younger than he'd expected, with dark hair plastered to her face and a dress the color of dirt. She held the bundle against her chest with both arms crossed over it. "I have a baby," she said, as though that explained everything, as though she was telling him the most important fact there was. "I see that," he said. "You need water." It wasn't a question. She nodded once. He unslung his canteen from the saddle. It was full, as his canteens always were on the flats, and stepped toward her slowly, the way he stepped toward an animal that had been hurt. She took it from him and drank 2 careful swallows, and then tipped it for the baby, and he watched her do it and felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time, something that had the shape of recognition. "My ranch is 4 miles north," he said. "You can ride. I'll walk." She looked at him. "You don't know me." "No," he said, "but I know this country, and I know what it does to people who run out of water. You get on the horse." Her name was Nora Begley. He learned that much on the slow walk north, asking one question at a time and letting the silences stretch between them without pressing. She answered in short, careful sentences, as though she was not yet sure what she was allowed to say. He told her his name. He told her the ranch had a well and a cook stove and a room with a door that latched. She listened to all of it without speaking, and he understood that she was weighing whether any man's word could be trusted, and he thought she was right to weigh it. At the ranch she sat at his kitchen table and drank 3 cups of water, and then ate the beans he warmed on the stove without embarrassment, because she was well past the point where hunger permitted embarrassment. Clara slept against her shoulder, fed and quiet at last. Mercer kept himself busy on the other side of the kitchen and did not hover. "You can stay," he said, when she had finished eating. "Not," he paused, searching for words. "There's a room. The room locks from the inside. I'm telling you that because I want you to know it." She looked at him for a long moment over the empty bowl. "Why?" she asked. He turned back to the stove. "'Cause it's the right thing," he said, "and because my mother walked 40 miles alone once, before I was born, I never forgot that she did it." She stayed. The days that followed moved at the pace of the ranch, slow, purposeful, unhurried. Nora found her footing gradually. She cooked when she felt like it, and when she did the food was good enough that Mercer's 2 hands started finding reasons to linger at mealtimes. She fixed a broken hinge on the cellar door that had been broken for 2 years. She sat on the porch in the evenings with Clara and watched the light go out of the sky in colors he had stopped noticing, and he found himself watching those colors again. He did not push. He did not ask what she planned. He built the space around her and waited to see what she would do with it. What she did, after 8 days, was come to stand beside him at the coral fence at dusk and say, "I've been thinking about staying longer, if that's still what you meant." "It's still what I meant," he said. She nodded. They stood there while the last light went copper and then grey. On the 12th day, the trouble came. It came in the shape of 2 men from Callaway Creek, the creditors her late husband had owed, riding with a paper they claimed gave them right to the wagon and the mule and the household goods she had left behind. They had somehow followed her trail, and they arrived in mid-afternoon with loud voices and an air of certainty, and the older one grabbed her arm in the yard before Mercer had finished crossing from the barn. He crossed the remaining distance fast. "Take your hand off her," he said. His voice had gone flat and cold, the way it had gone flat and cold in other circumstances, in other years, and the older man heard something in it, and released her arm and stepped back. "We have a legal paper," the man said. "Let me see it." Mercer held out his hand, and the man gave him the paper, and he read it slowly and then handed it back. "That paper authorizes you to claim goods left at a property in Callaway Creek," he said. "This is not Callaway Creek. This woman is not your debtor. You are on my land, and I'm asking you once to leave it." "She owes." "She doesn't owe you anything on my land." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Ride out." They rode out. Nora stood in the yard with her heart slamming against her ribs and Clara pressed to her chest. And when she turned to look at him, she found him watching her with an expression she had not seen on a man's face before, not anger on his own behalf, but something quieter and more deliberate. As though he had done exactly what he intended to do and intended to keep doing it. Her hands were shaking. She pressed one of them flat against the fence post to stop the trembling. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Then no, not quite yet." He put his hand over hers on the fence post. He didn't say anything. He just left his hand there until hers stopped shaking, and the afternoon light fell long and golden over the yard, and the dust the men had raised drifted away on a slow wind. That night she did not go to bed when Clara slept. She sat on the porch instead, and after a while he came and sat in the other chair, and they talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with creditors or debts or dead husbands, about his mother's 40-mile walk, and what she had found at the end of it, about the way the stars out here were different from anywhere else, about what a person owed themselves when everything they had built once had fallen down. "I'm not afraid of starting over," she said. "I was, but I'm not now." He was quiet for a moment. "You carried your baby across the dry flats alone," he said. "I don't think you were ever really afraid." "I was terrified," she said. "And you kept walking anyway." He turned to look at her. "That's not the absence of fear, Nora. That's the whole definition of courage." She looked at him in the dark, and the stars were very bright, and she thought that she had not been looked at that way, seen that way, in a very long time, maybe ever. "I'd like to stay," she said, "not as a matter of necessity, as a choice." "Then stay," he said, "as a choice." He reached over and took her hand, and she let him, and they sat like that until the night had fully arrived, and the coyotes started their long conversation somewhere out on the flats. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. The ranch was quiet and solid around them, the kind of quiet that was not emptiness, but the sound of something being built. In the weeks that followed, the life they made together had no grand ceremony to it, only the accumulation of small true things, the way he learned which corner of the barn made Clara laugh, the way Nora began to leave her door open in the evenings because the house felt better that way, the afternoon he came in from riding and found a curtain hung in the window he had left bare for 6 years, and could not explain why the sight of it made him still in the doorway for a long moment before he went in. She had carried her baby across a dead and burning stretch of earth with nothing left in the canteen, and no certainty of what was on the other side. She had done it because Clara needed her too, and because she was the kind of woman who kept walking when there was nothing left to do but walk. What she found on the other side was not what she had been walking toward. It was better. And in the evenings, when the light went long and rose-colored over the dry flats and Mercer came from the range and hung his hat by the door and Clara reached up her small arms for him, and he lifted her without a second thought, Nora felt the particular fullness of a life that had been rebuilt from the ground up by her own hands, and held at last by someone who understood exactly what that cost and never for a single moment took it lightly.